I've given 3 sermons on prophecy, going through the books of Daniel, and now we'll be going into the book of Revelation. And the basic question I could have asked when I gave the first sermon, and maybe we'll need to record an introduction to the series, because the real question to answer is, who are the beasts of the book of Revelation? Beasts in the plural because more than one beast is mentioned. Now we could think, those of us that have been in contact with the Church of God for many years, that we know all that stuff. If you think that or you say that, you're mistaken. Just as I, who started studying this back in 1958, which seems forever ago, and have preached many, many sermons on these subjects, more than any other minister that I know. I have had to continually learn and reframe my thinking, because as soon as you think, well, you know it all, then you find out you know nothing. But it is like a jigsaw puzzle that we're putting together. In the first chapter we covered in Daniel 2, Nebuchadnezzar's dream gave us the overall frame of the puzzle. Now we're trying to put the rest of the puzzle together. As we make out certain images inside the puzzle, you put those pieces together if you've ever done a jigsaw puzzle. And I love jigsaw puzzles. I think I've mentioned that we do have one puzzle that we never did complete. It's got 3,000 pieces. And we did try a few years ago to put it back together, and we still didn't finish it. So it's on my bucket list. Finish that puzzle before you die. But this prophecy is like that puzzle, so we're looking for the parts that we need to put in together inside, and finally we'll end up like the puzzles I normally assemble, and I always leave maybe 20 pieces out so my grandkids can come, and then they realize, hey, we could fit these last few pieces in. They just have to sort them out. And that's the way this sermon will end, with us having maybe 20 pieces, maybe not even that. And that's the only pieces we will need to put into the puzzle to finish it. And before we can put those in, chances are we'll just have to wait and see. And time will tell, by which time you'll say, oh, now I see exactly where that piece goes, right there. But as I view the world, as I look at world news and I study the map of the world and of the Middle East and of Europe, and I focus what every country is doing at the moment and what they're planning, you see, I can just visualize all of Europe, from Spain going all the way across, or Portugal, Spain, across every country, all the way to Russia. I know where every country is. I have a basic idea of what's happening in those countries. Most people are not familiar with the world as maybe they ought to be. What 3 countries are the closest geographically to the United States? Let me ask that again. What 3 countries are the closest geographically to the United States? All Texans will answer the first one, Mexico. The people up in Minnesota will tell you Canada. That's number 2, or number 1 and 2. What's number 3? Russia. 55 miles away across the Bering Strait. We don't think of that. We forget that the world's round. So, today I continue the story, which I started with Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2, where he saw this image which represented the Babylonian Empire, followed by the Persian Empire, followed by Greece, or the Greco-Macedonian Empire, followed by the Roman Empire that very soon split into 2, pictured by the 2 legs that went all the way down until you have finally 10 toes at the bottom, where the whole story ends. That's the framework. Then we went to Daniel 7, where Daniel had a dream, and he saw 4 beasts, one like a lion, one like a bear, one like a leopard with 4 heads, and then another beast, awful beast. And that beast had 10 horns. Kind of becomes all dramatic. And you think, how will I ever remember all these things? Well, it becomes easy when you repeat it often enough, and the Bible repeats it. Those beasts back there were empires. And there were 10 horns, and then another fat horn, more stout than the others, who came up and plucked up 3 of the horns by their roots. And that's where Daniel leaves us. You see, that was sufficient for God to give Daniel that picture, because then he died and the world continued. Babylon fell, Persia arose, Persia fell, Greece arose. Interestingly, giving everybody a copy of the Greek Old Testament, or an Old Testament translation into Greek, which was nice. So when the Apostle Paul was doing his ministry among the Gentiles, he had a Greek Old Testament he could quote. So the Bible wasn't some obscure thing that was only in Palestine. No, it was available to people all over the place. And Jesus was crucified, and the disciples scattered, and they were killed, until finally there was only one disciple left, who then found himself in exactly the same situation that Daniel had been. You see, Daniel was in captivity, or in Babylon. Over in Jerusalem, the city was destroyed. The temple was destroyed. There was nothing there. Righteous Daniel would have wondered what's going to happen. So God had to show him what was going to happen. So here you go 600, almost 700 years later, and you find the Apostle John, an old man, in prison on the Isle of Patmos, just south of Turkey on today's maps. And he's in prison. And God came and gave him a revelation. And the reason for this revelation we find in Revelation 1 verse 1. The revelation God gave John to show his servants what must shortly come to pass. That's what it says, shortly come to pass. So the book of Revelation is not just an end time book. It showed John what would happen shortly. And it showed the people after John what would happen to them shortly. So anywhere you lived from that time to this, you could have gone to the book of Revelation and said, what does Revelation tell about me, where I'm living? Christians that were being hunted like animals and butchered, they would have realized, oh, this is what Revelation said would happen. All through history. Because you'll say, yeah, well, what I'm really interested in is 2016, the year I'm going into. We'll get there. But we need the background, otherwise we jump to all kinds of conclusions and they could be the wrong ones. People do that all the time. Remember, this was the year we had 5 blood moons and all kinds of things were going to happen? I didn't say that, somebody else said that. People get all bug-eyed about things. So let's go to the book of Revelation, see if we can make some sense out of this book that predicts beasts with heads and horns and all kinds of funny things. And you'll say, what is it talking about? So I'm getting to the next chapter in this series. Daniel 2 was the first one. Daniel 7, the next one. Now, Revelation 13. Let's go to Revelation 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Oh boy, this is fun. Now, if you have a New International Version of the Bible, you will see that it says something to the effect, and the dragon stood upon the sand of the sea. Now, is it talking about the dragon, which you find in Revelation 12, identified as Satan the devil who deceives the whole world? Revelation 12, verse 9. The dragon that chases the woman and wants to kill off all her seed, as it says in that chapter. So when you get to chapter 13 and it says, and I stood upon the sand of the sea, is it talking about the dragon who's standing there? Or is it talking about John who is standing there? The one translation says the dragon stood. Most other translations say, and I stood, meaning John. Which one's correct? I checked it in the Greek, and the Greek doesn't say. The Greek just says, he. He stood upon the sand of the sea, so it's either way. If it's still talking about the devil, that's interesting because that tells you who's behind all this stuff. That's interesting. Now, if it's talking about John, who's standing upon the sand of the sea, that's also interesting because that's similar to what we found with Daniel, who stood and looked over the sea and saw beasts coming out of the sea being the Mediterranean Sea. So either way, we just carry on reading. I'll read it like it is in the King James, which assumes that it's talking about John. And I stood upon the sand of the sea and saw a beast rise out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon his head 10 crowns, and upon his heads I saw the name of blasphemy. So whatever it is, it's not good. What is this beast? I don't know. We have to keep reading. Remember I told you before. Just keep reading. The beast that I saw was like unto a leopard, and his feet were like the feet of a bear, and the mouth was like the mouth of a lion. Oh, so the beast he sees coming out of the water is a combination of a leopard, a bear, and a lion. Oh, then you say, oh, that's similar to what Daniel saw. Except that Daniel saw 3 different beasts. Daniel saw a lion, a bear, and a leopard. Do you get that? Daniel saw a lion, Babylon, a bear, Persia, a leopard, Greece. What does John see? He sees a beast like unto a leopard, a bear, and a lion. You see the difference? John reverses what Daniel said. Daniel saw a lion, bear, leopard. John sees leopard, bear, lion. Interesting. Who never noticed that before? I'm sure some of you. Why is it like that? For the simple reason that Daniel lived over here 600 years before, and the way he looked in history, he saw the lion, bear, leopard. And then the next beast. John, living at the time of the fourth beast, looks back. And looking back, he sees leopard, bear, lion. Simple. Why? Because John was living during the time of the Roman Empire, and the Roman Empire where he lived had combined all those other empires into one great empire. Is that simple enough? I hope. And the dragon, that's Satan the devil, as it's defined in the previous chapter, gave him his power and his seat and great authority. So who's the beast we're talking about? The same one that we saw back in the book of Daniel. The Roman Empire. They're the ones that put John in prison. Now go back to verse 1. I saw a beast rise up out of the sea, having 7 heads and 10 horns. Why 7 heads? Where do we get 7 heads from? Okay, let's remind ourselves of what we saw in the book of Daniel. The first beast was a lion. The lion had 1 head. The second beast was a bear. The bear had 1 head. The next beast was a leopard. It had 4 heads. Remember when I read that, I said, remember that. Why did the fourth beast have 4 heads? Because Alexander the Great's empire divided into 4, so you have 4 heads. That's 6 heads. Then you had the next beast, another head. So this fourth beast had a combination of 7 heads. Easy? You with me? Easy. As long as you remembered what you read in Daniel 7. And I did tell you, remember that. 4 heads. And 10 horns. Now we read that in the book of Daniel, that there would be 10 kings that would arise out of it. So basically what we have here is the combination empire, which is the Roman Empire, out of which would come 10 horns. Right. Verse 3. And I saw one of his heads, as it were, wounded to death. The Roman Empire. One of its heads. Which head? The last one, the Roman head, was wounded as if unto death. And here's the most amazing thing in history. Babylon fell, gone. Persia fell. Some people are still worried about Iran, modern day, what used to be Persia. It's a lesser nation, just like Iraq. You know, a few years ago, I heard preachers say, oh, Saddam Hussein is the end-time Babylonian leader. He's going to rebuild Babylon. The poor man finally crawled out of a gutter. Was hanged by his own people. See, God said Babylon will fall, Persia will fall, Greece will fall. Is anybody today saying that Greece is the great whatever? No, it fell. Then Rome fell due to its own internal decay, as is vividly pointed out by Gibbon in his Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire, written during the time of Napoleon. How this great empire just fell. Fell because of its internal decay, trying to be the policeman to the world, armies everywhere, until the northern armies from the barbarians came streaming down, first the Vandals, then the Heruli and the Ostrogoths, and they literally moved in and occupied Italy. And the Pope ended up a captive in Vatican City. And everybody would have thought, that's the end of the Roman Empire, just like the other empires fell and were no more. Now Rome has fallen. But John wrote, I saw one of his heads as it was wounded to death, and his deadly wound was healed, and all the world wondered after the beast. If you lived back there, you would have thought, Rome's going to fall just like all the others. And then you would have been mistaken, because Rome fell but was resurrected. It was called in history Justinian's restoration of the Roman Empire, 554 BC. Rome fell in 476 and was restored in 554. And when that happened, it says they worshipped the dragon which gave power unto the beast. And they worshipped the beast, saying, who is like unto the beast? Who is able to make war with him? Because suddenly you had on the world scene something that was called the Holy Roman Empire. And you had the Pope, this big religious figure, who now crowned these emperors. Put the crown on the emperor's head. First there was Justinian. At that time, the Vandals and the Heruli and the Ostrogoths, those three foreign armies that had come down there, they were chased back north, plucked out by the roots. Then you had Justinian ruling with the blessing of the Pope. Now, if you were a true Christian back at that time, you would have realized that what you're seeing here, with everybody worshiping this, everybody saying, oh, isn't this beautiful, isn't this wonderful? You would have realized it wasn't. You would have read this book to see, hey, The dragon is behind this. Why? Because those people would have put you to death or chased you out of the country or wherever they would have chased you. Because persecution came on God's people. Verse 5, and there was given unto him a mouth, speaking great things and blasphemy, and power was given unto him to continue for 42 months. In prophecy, 1260 days is 1260 years. And he, the mouth, opened his mouth in blasphemy against God, to blaspheme his name and his tabernacle and them that dwell in heaven. And it was given unto him to make war with the saints and to overcome them, and powers given him over all kindreds, tongues, and nations. And all that dwell upon the earth shall worship him, whose names are not written in the book of life of the Lamb, slain from the foundation of the world. This big church that was now allied with the state used the armies of the state to persecute Christians, to kill them. And that would continue from 554 for 1260 years. And if you want to add that up, it'll bring you to 1814. 554, 1260 years, 1814. What happened in 1814? Let me tell you what happened before 1814. Justinian ruled, given authority by the Pope. Then Charlemagne of France became the Holy Roman Emperor, and the Pope was there to put the crown on Charlemagne's head. And then Otto the Great from Germany became Emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and a Pope was there to put a crown on his head. And then after that, there was Charles the Great over toward Czechoslovakia, toward the eastern part of Europe. Another emperor of the Holy Roman Empire, and the Pope was there to put the crown on his head. So who was all that? Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto the Great, Charles the Great. That's 4. Then another, a little different to the others. He came from Corsica. Little guy, only about 5'2" or something, or 4 or whatever. His name was Napoleon. Napoleon Bonaparte, this little Corsican, marched up into France and got all the French people to follow him. For years fought the Peninsular Wars down in Spain and with the British. And the Duke of Wellington was over there, leading the British troops from 1806, 1807. In fact, in 1805, Napoleon's fleet was defeated by Lord Nelson. If you read the history of that time, you'd think, what's happening here? 1805, Napoleon's fleet is defeated. You'd think, well, now Napoleon ought to be defeated. No, he is not. In fact, before that, very significantly for us in America, 1803. What happened in 1803? The French sold us the Louisiana Purchase. This whole area of the Mississippi, Missouri valleys, that whole territory was given to the United States on payment. Why? Because Napoleon needed the money for all his wars. So he sold this territory to us. And America doubled in size overnight when Thomas Jefferson was President of the United States. Do you think these things weren't significant? Everything that's happened in the world revolved around these things. There's hardly a significant date that you can think of without going back to the Bible and say, wait a bit, the Bible said that. So 1803, Louisiana purchased because they needed money for Napoleon's wars. And here was the Duke of Wellington waiting. He had an army there. And when you read that history, which I've done, you think, well, surely now, they must get into a battle now. 1805, a naval battle. Lord Nelson on his ship, the Victory. He's the little guy who stands in Trafalgar Square in London, if you've ever been there, on this tall pillar thing. Lord Nelson, he was famous. He had one eye, one arm. And he died on the Victory, his ship, when they defeated Napoleon's navy in 1805. And you think, well, now they should attack Napoleon, defeat him. 1806, 1807, 1808, 1809, 1810, 1811. 1812, Napoleon attacks Russia. And the English thought, well, at least now we're rid of him, so they sent troops over here to come and regain America. In case you're wondering why the 1812 war occurred in the United States, the British came back here to try to regain their colonies. And so America had to fight the British again in 1812. That's the reason why it happened in 1812. You may know it as the 1812 War. That's the reason. All these things were happening in Europe. Napoleon's troops get caught in the snow in Russia. They virtually wiped out. Napoleon finally straggles back to France with a handful of soldiers, but the French always loved him. So very soon he had another army. 1813, 1814. Napoleon's back in the saddle. The British troops are back. They're ready to fight him. Harry Smith, who was over here fighting the Americans, he's back over there. Got to fight this Napoleon. Then comes 1814. And Napoleon abdicates. He gives up power, and he gets put on the island of Elba as a prisoner. And when you read the history, you think, well, why did that happen? Why did he just give up and become a prisoner and go down to Elba? And when I was reading the history, I was thinking history, not prophecy. I was reading history. I thought, this doesn't make sense. All these years, Duke of Wellington wanted to fight him, and then suddenly now he abdicates. Why? Then I remembered. God said this Holy Roman Empire would continue for 1,260 years, from 554 till 1814. That's why Napoleon abdicated. That's when it stopped. See, it wasn't up to man. God had already said it. So Napoleon was down on the island of Elba, And all the leaders from these European countries went over to Vienna, and they're sitting now to try to figure out what to do with Europe after Napoleon's gone. The Duke of Wellington is there, and all the other leaders, generals. And while they're sitting there discussing what should happen to Europe, a message comes in the next year, 1815. Napoleon has escaped from Elba and is marching back to Paris. He literally escaped with a few soldiers. He got to Marseille, and when he got there, the French people welcomed him back. And between there and Paris, so many soldiers joined him that when he got back to Paris, he had an army again. And one of the men at the conference in Vienna turned to the English leader, Duke of, I forget his name now, Duke of Wellington. The Duke of Wellington, and said, "You've got your job back." And the Duke of Wellington had to go back to England, try to get an army back together, and move it back to France, Belgium. Brand new army. And the Duke of Wellington was looking at a map where his position was, Napoleon's position. And he went backward from his position and put his finger on a spot, and he said, "That's where we will fight him." So the Duke of Wellington retreated, and he used the retreat to organize his army. And when he got to the spot called Wellington, that's where he waited for Napoleon. And the battle took place on a Sunday. And with the help of the Prussians, Napoleon saw his Waterloo. He was defeated. And that was the end of Napoleon. The next time they sent him all the way to St. Helena, which is down in the southern part of the Atlantic. A long way away. He wasn't going to escape from there and come back to Europe. They wanted to make sure. He was a long way away. And that's where Napoleon died. He is buried in the, I think it's called the Sacré-Cœur in Paris. And if you ever go and see it, it's the biggest casket, marble, tombstone, big thing. It could not fit into this room, I don't think. In fact, I think at the final resurrection, they're going to have angels get in there with a 10-ton truck or something to lift that lid off Napoleon's tomb. It's gigantic. The amazing thing is that all this was predicted, not exactly, but the fact that this would continue for 42 months to the time of Napoleon. But it was also predicted, verse 7, there was given unto him, that's this spokesman, this mouth that spoke for the Holy Roman Empire, to make war with the saints. Verse 9, if any man has an ear, let him hear. See, if you lived back there, if you lived at that time and you saw all these great things happening in Europe and these great cathedrals being built and the great crusades being sent out, and you realize that some of those crusades were sent out against the Albigensians and the Waldensians and others. Some of those people kept the Sabbath. Some of them kept the Passover, and they were killed for it. If you had lived back there, you would have realized that all this stuff, this holy stuff that the world called holy, was not of God. Verse 10, he that leads into captivity shall go into captivity. He that kills with the sword must be killed with the sword. Basically an expression. It's all the Hebrew type expression. If you want to carry on sinning, you will carry on sinning. If you want to kill, you will be killed. If you will want to do this, that's what you'll carry on doing. Hopefully that's not the way we react. Here is the patience and the faith of the saints. The saints will see what's happening. They'll know this just has to pass. Verse 12, he exercises all the power of the first beast before him, and causes the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. So who was the first beast of this Revelation 13? It was the Roman Empire. Who was the next one who got people to worship the Roman Empire? Became the spokesman. Became the one that persecuted the saints. It was the church. It was the church. In case we have a few more questions about it, we need a few more pieces of the puzzle. God gives them to us. Verse 11. And I beheld another beast coming up out of the earth. And he had 2 horns, like a lamb, but he spoke like a dragon. He appears like a lamb, innocent, like the Lamb of God. But he speaks like a dragon, like Satan the devil. And he exercised all the power of the first beast before him, and caused the earth and them that dwell therein to worship the first beast, whose deadly wound was healed. Why did we end up with a Roman church? Who was the one that gave us Sunday worship? If you say the church gave it, no. Constantine the Great, the emperor, gave it. The emperor said, from this day forth let all people worship on that venerable day of the sun. That's what the emperor said. And the church came and said, we'll put our stamp of approval on it. Verse 13, he does great wonders. We haven't seen this yet. See, if we don't agree with it, all we have to do is just wait. This is the framework. All we have to do is wait, because sooner or later we'll see these things again. And he does great wonders, so that he makes fire come down from heaven on the earth in the sight of men, and deceives them that dwell on the earth by the means of the miracles which he has power to do in the sight of the beast, saying to them that dwell on the earth that they should make an image to the beast which has the wound by a sword and did die, or did live. What is the image of the beast? This mouth, this spokesman, made an image to the beast. If you were watching TV or the news when Pope Benedict was elected as Pope, you may have been surprised to find that the election of a pope was somewhat like the election of somebody to political office. They take all these cardinals and they lock them in a room in the Sistine Chapel, and they got to stay in there. They feed them in there, and they stay there, and they sleep there until they can finally decide who should be the pope. And you know the story. There's smoke coming out of a chimney there, and I forget now if it's dark smoke. They haven't decided. If it's white smoke, they have decided who the Pope is. But quite a few people were quite surprised to realize that, wait a bit, there's all kinds of lobbying behind the scenes as to who should be the Pope. And more we hear, what happened. In fact, the present Pope got second place in that particular gathering. And not to want division in the church, he actually went to them and said, I withdraw my name, which is why Pope Benedict became Pope. Ratzinger from Germany. So if you knew that, you would have realized that this seemingly obscure man from South America was not actually that obscure as far as the church was concerned. Wasn't surprised to the church that he was now made Pope because he got second place last time. But the interesting thing, it's like an election. It's like politics. You see what happened when the original Catholic Church was formed? They set it up just like the original Roman government was set up. They figured that's a good governmental system. So we'll form our system based on that. They literally made an image of the Roman Empire and their senators and how they voted for their Caesar, and they brought it into the church, and you have literally an image of the beast. Remember, the original beast was the empire. And if you don't worship that image, it's nice for us. We have freedom of religion. We can worship or not worship. This is America. It's one of the rights we have according to the First Amendment. The right of assembly, the right of worship, the right to petition the government, the right to say what we like. It's not like that in the rest of the world. So people who spoke up against the church and that system, they were killed. First Englishman who translated the New Testament from the original Greek, Tyndale, he was burnt. Servetus, who wrote a book entitled The Errors of the Trinity and wrote about baptism, adult baptism. He was killed over in Geneva, Switzerland. Didn't matter that the Protestant Reformation had already taken place and people thought, hey, we're free to do things. No, the system was still there. Martin Luther, the great Protestant reformer in Germany, when he heard that people wanted to be baptized as adults, he said, good idea, take them down to the river and drown them. We forget. We forget what happened in the name of Christianity. The first English ship that was used in the slave trade was given to an English sea captain by Queen Elizabeth I of England. The name of the ship was Jesus of Lübeck. Imagine a slaving ship putting the name of Jesus on the ship. Oh, the things we've done in the name of Jesus. Verse 16, and he caused all, small and great, rich and poor, free and bond, to receive a mark on their right hand and in their foreheads. The mark of the beast. What is the mark of the beast? I remember when I first saw barcodes put on everything in the supermarket. Some religious people said, that is the mark of the beast. You cannot go in there and buy anything that does not have that mark on it. You see, that's the mark of the beast. Sounds funny. I've heard of chips, not fish and chips, electronic chips and all kinds of stuff. The mark of the beast. Let me tell you something about the book of Revelation. Very simple. Any time in the book of Revelation you read about something that you cannot understand, go find that somewhere else in the Bible. The book of Revelation refers to the rest of the Bible more often than any other book in the New Testament, by far. So, what does it say about the mark of the beast? It's a mark in the right hand and in their forehead. Now, you see, if you knew the scriptures, you would immediately know what it's talking about. But we don't know the scriptures, not like our forefathers who read the Bible and remembered what they read. Is there some place in the Bible where you can read about a mark in the forehead and in your hand? The answer is yes. Let's go look up a few. Let's go to Exodus 13. What do you think the mark of the beast is? Some people will say, oh, it's Sunday keeping. Seventh-day Adventist Church will tell you it's the keeping of Sunday. Well, that's not the whole answer. Let's go back to Exodus 13. What's Exodus 13 talking about? Some of you will remember. Exodus 12 talks about the Passover. Exodus 13 is a recap of what happened the previous chapter. And verse 9, well, let's start reading from verse 8. Exodus 13, verse 8. And you shall show your son in that day, saying, this is because of what the Lord did unto me when I came forth out of Egypt. He's talking about the Feast of Unleavened Bread. You'll see that in verse 3. He's talking about the Passover and Feast of Unleavened Bread. It says, when you do these things and your son asks you, why are you doing it? This is what you will tell him. You'll tell him this is why, because God did things for us. And it shall be for you a sign upon your hand, and a memorial between your eyes, that the Lord's law may be in your mouth, for with a strong hand the Lord brought you out of Egypt. So Revelation says the mark of the beast is something in your hand and your forehead. Here it said the Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread is in your hand and your forehead. Where else? Let's go to Deuteronomy 6. Deuteronomy 6. See, somebody was familiar with the Old Testament, we'd immediately say, oh, I see what you're talking about. Deuteronomy 6. It's talking about the law of God. We can read from verse 4. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God is one Lord. And you shall love the Lord your God with your heart and with all your soul and with all your might. And these words which I command you this day shall be in your heart. Right? This is a famous commandment. Jesus quoted it. And you shall diligently teach them to your children. Verse 7. And verse 8, you shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, and they shall be as frontlets between your eyes. What? The law of God. The law of God will be in your mind and in your hand. What you think and what you do. Let's go to chapter 11, verse 18. Chapter 11. You could read the whole chapter. It's talking about the law of God. Verse 18 of Deuteronomy 11, therefore shall you lay up these my words in your heart and in your soul. You shall bind them for a sign upon your hand, that they may be as frontlets between your eyes. What identifies you with God? The law of God. Yes, the Sabbath. Exodus 31:13 says the Sabbath is a sign between you and God. But it's part of the law. What identifies us with God is the fact that we have the law of God in our minds and in our hands. That's what we do. That's how we live. In the book of Daniel, it was prophesied that somebody would come to change times and laws. Who came and changed times and laws? The church did. And it got all of us to start worshiping like the Romans did. Where did we get Christ Mass? Well, that tells you where it came from. A mass, you know. Protestants don't normally have masses. The Roman Saturnalia. That's the day the world has just said they worship the birth of Jesus. It's false. Easter from Ishtar, false. A totally different system of religion based on Roman paganism replaced the true religion of God. And those who continued the true religion of God were killed. If somebody wasn't willing to have the mark of the beast, in other words, worship like the beast wanted you to worship, you couldn't buy or sell. The year Columbus came to America, 1492, Columbus sailed the oceans blue. That was the year that the Catholic Church took over Spain, got rid of the Muslims, and immediately introduced the Inquisition. They sent soldiers through the Spanish areas on a Sabbath, Saturday, to check the chimneys. And if they saw a chimney where no smoke was coming out of, they would go into that house and they would drag those people out, because they would know those are Jews keeping the Sabbath. That's why they didn't make a fire, and they would kill them. Which, by the way, is the reason you keep finding, as my wife and I have found, all kinds of people in the Hispanic community who, when they get to know you, tell you, actually, we're Jewish. And we fled out of Spain. Then we went to South America. Yes. That's the only way they could survive, was by fleeing. So what's the mark of the beast? It's that which identifies everybody with the beast. One man in South Africa wrote to me and he said, doesn't matter what day I worship. I wrote back to him, I said, well, maybe it doesn't. I said, but you really have a choice in life. You have a choice between being a son of God, and if you go to Revelation 17, which is the next chapter we will cover, Mystery Babylon the Great, the mother of harlots. You have a choice to be a son of God or the son of you know who. It's very easy. But that kind of persecution will come back. Do you know the Puritan fathers, the Puritan settlers in the United States? They did not keep Christmas. They outlawed it. You know, Christmas did not become a federal holiday until after the Civil War. It's amazing what you read. After the Civil War. Okay. What's the mark of the beast? That which identifies you with the beast. What's the mark of God? That which identifies you with God. Somebody wants to submit to God would obey God. Simple. Verse 17, that no man might buy or sell save he that has the mark or the name of the beast or the number of his name. Oh, what's the number of his name? Here is wisdom. Let him that has understanding count the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. That dreadful 666. Anytime I get a new tag for a car, I always check the number. One of my friends in South Africa got a number for his car. It was 666. I said to him, if they gave that to me, I'd go back and ask them to change it. What is the number of the beast? Letters in languages have numbers. For example, the Roman numerals. You would be familiar with Roman numerals. X is 10. I is 1. V is 5. M is 1,000. Millennium. M, 1,000. So, sometimes they give you the date in Roman numerals. Anyway, so if you look at somebody's name and you look at the letters, you could figure out those letters are worth something. Now, it is true that you can go through and find all kinds of names, which if you take the letters and you add up what the values of those letters are, you may find that that name adds up to 666. And people have done that. Mainly in the Latin. One of the titles of the Pope added up to 666. But which words should we take? It's so simple. It's really very simple, so simple that I hardly need to spend much time on it. What languages were used to write the Bible? Hebrew, Old Testament, Greek, New Testament. Okay, what words in the Old Testament, Hebrew, and the New Testament, Greek, would add up to 666? It's as simple as that. Find the words and you've got it. The word for Rome, remember it's the number of the beast. It's also the number of a man. The beast The last beast we saw was the Roman Empire. What's somebody who came from the Roman Empire called? Roman. So that's the name of man, and that's the name of beast. The word Rome, which we have in English, comes from Rometh. I don't have all the letters. I did have it, but I lost it between home and here. But I'll just give you the summary. When you read my literature on the subject, you'll have the whole story. But the word Rometh, from which we get Roman, in the Hebrew, adds up to 666. What was the Greek equivalent? We know they spoke Latin. They were called the Latino, meaning Latin man. And if you take that in the Greek, guess what? It adds up to 666. The only two words you can find, both in the Hebrew and the Greek, are talking about the same thing. Latium was the place where Latin came from. If you take those letters, and I can let you have them, next time I'll come, I'll remember. They add up to 666. Remember, it's the number of the beast, not of the church. What was the original beast? The empire. What do we worship? Where did we get all the stuff that all these people are worshiping? From the empire, from Roman paganism. That's why we're so wrapped up in all that stuff. You see, the church got us to worship that. Unless we don't want to. And we shouldn't. We started off with the framework of this prophecy back in the book of Daniel, chapter 2. Babylon fell, Persia fell, Greece fell, Rome took over. Rome split in two, the two legs, all the way down to the end. We need more details. So God gave us more details through the beasts that we saw in Daniel 7. The lion, the bear, the leopard with 4 heads, and then the 4th beast, the Roman Empire. That story is picked up for us here in Revelation 13. I saw a beast with 7 heads, the original 7 heads, and 10 horns, the 10 horns that would come from that. 3 of them would be pulled out, Vandals, Heruli, Ostrogoths. There were still 7 to come. Which were those 7? We covered some of them today. Justinian, Charlemagne, Otto the Great, Charles the Great, Napoleon. Then we get to an interesting pause. A pause where people would say, what's next? We're not told here what's next. So we need some more pieces to this puzzle. We'll get them when we go to Revelation 17, which is where I'll go next time. And don't miss it. It's exciting.